Hi, and welcome to the channel. I'm always seeking ways to improve my solar imaging, whether it's finding the best location, grabbing an elusive, excellent seeing opportunity, cleaning my optics, upgrading my gear, or upping my post-processing game. There's always a way to improve. In this video, I'm going to help you choose the best solar camera. I learned a lot in researching this topic. I ended up buying 3 new cameras to test and compare against my original camera. I used my own money, and these opinions are my own. I dove into the theory and then checked that against real-world results under the sun. The answers I got surprised me and will change the way I do solar photography. Stick around and you might learn something useful too. My objective was to determine which camera was best for telescopes like mine, taking solar images in both hydrogen alpha and white light. So what telescopes do I have? For hydrogen alpha and white light, I use the Lunt 100 MT f7 Universal Telescope. For white light only, I have a Tech 140 5.5-inch Apo refractor and a Tech 160 FL 6.3-inch Apo refractor. As far as Barlow lenses are concerned, I've got a Siebert 1.75x Barlow, a Teleview 2.5x PowerMate, and a Teleview 4x PowerMate. One important note: always observe caution when viewing the sun. Looking at the sun unprotected for even a few moments can cause serious, permanent eye damage, even blindness. Always use a proper solar filter or solar telescope. A hydrogen alpha eyepiece filter is not a solar filter and should not be used for this purpose. When you start to look into cameras, you find yourself reading about resolution, pixel size, quantum efficiency, full well capacity, and more. Which specifications matter for solar imaging? What does the theory say about how to match a camera to a telescope? The most common camera suppliers for solar telescopes are ZWO, QHY, and Player One. All are based in China. They get their sensors from Sony in Japan. However, as an example, while they all use the same sensor, it's not true that the ZWO 174mm, the QHY 5 III 174M, and the Player One Apollo M cameras are identical. Some suppliers may enable features in the sensor that others do not. Some include additional memory, and some add unique form factors and other features like tilt. I've gathered the specifications for the most common solar camera sensors and listed them here. FPS is frames per second at the widest possible sensor area. All cameras will increase their frames per second as you decrease the sensor area, also called the ROI or region of interest. Resolution is the product of the sensor X and Y axes. For example, IMX 533 is 3008 by 3008 pixels or 9 megapixels. Pixel size is the size in microns of the pixel element in the sensor. This turns out to be a vital characteristic we'll dive into in detail soon. QE, or quantum efficiency, is the percent of photons striking the sensor that are converted into electrons. The QE is pretty similar across the sensors and not a big differentiator. The shutter can be either rolling or global. A rolling shutter exposes one line of pixels at a time, whereas a global shutter exposes the entire sensor at once. There's a general rule that a global shutter is preferred, but my experience is that it doesn't make a difference. Other solar imaging experts I've spoken to have said the same, that a global shutter is nice to have, but that there are other much more important decision criteria about the camera. ADC is the analog to digital converter. For these sensors, it can be either 12 or 14-bit. This means the 14-bit will give you 4 times as many shades of intensity. It's better, but difficult for the average person to discern. Read noise is the noise created by the camera sensor and its associated electronics. Less noise is preferred. Full well capacity is the largest charge a pixel can hold before saturation. When the charge in a pixel exceeds the saturation level, the charge starts to fill adjacent pixels, creating noise, a process known as blooming. A higher full well capacity is very helpful in solar imaging to get good contrast. I should note there is a new version of the IMX 290 sensor called the IMX 462. It's very similar. It has the same frame rate and it has the same resolution and pixel size and the same ADC, but the QE is 91%. The read noise is a bit less, but the full well is much less than the 290. It seems to me that for mono use on the sun, where the near-infrared superiority of the 462 is irrelevant, the 290 might be the better mono camera because full well is a very important criteria, and it's almost 5 times better in the 290 than the 462. I would need to evaluate both cameras side by side to know for sure. When trying to match a camera to a telescope, the key formula is focal length divided by aperture equals sample factor K times pixel size over 1.02 times wavelength. The focal length of your telescope is the aperture times the focal ratio times the Barlow factor if you have one. All three of my refractors are about 7.1. My aperture is 100 millimeters for the Lunt, 140 millimeters for the Tech 140 ED, and 160 millimeters for the Tech 160 FL. For optimal sampling, the sample factor should be 3. For hydrogen alpha, the wavelength should be 0.656 micrometers. For white light, we should use 0.54 micrometers for the wavelength. The pixel size is determined by the sensor in your camera. You can increase the pixel size with binning, but we're going to stick with the fundamental pixel size for this discussion. My solar telescope is an f7.1 refractor with a 100 millimeter aperture. By adding a Barlow, I can increase the focal length by a factor, in my case, of 1.75x, 2.5x, or 4x. Plugging in all the numbers, we can derive what pixel size is optimal for each focal length I have with my telescope. Then I can see which camera most closely matches based on pixel size. There are other considerations. We'll get to those shortly. So what cameras did I have to evaluate? QHY5 III 174M camera, which uses the IMX 174 sensor. The Player One Saturn SQR-M camera, which uses the IMX 533 sensor. The Player One M Mini camera, which uses the IMX 429 sensor, and the Player One Mars camera, which uses the IMX 290 sensor. In the field, I tested just about every combination of camera with focal length by switching cameras and Barlows. I also tested many combinations of full solar disks, as well as close-ups of prominences and surface details. For every capture, I used SharpCap Pro, a 16-bit SER file with a 10 millisecond exposure, and the gain adjusted to the histogram was 75%. For white light, some of my exposures were less than 10 milliseconds to get a 75% histogram. In AutoStacker, I chose the best 200 of 2000 frames. In all cases, I took flats with a Daystar flat cap. I also used the same settings in IMPPG for each common set of images. I did this over several different days with different types of seeing conditions. Now let's turn to some real-world testing. Representative images are shown here. For hydrogen alpha at f7, theory says my best camera should be the IMX 290. What did I find? 290 ranked number 1, providing the most detail in line with what theory predicts, but to get a full solar disk, it required a 5 or 6 panel mosaic. Number 2 was the 533. In many cases, I thought the 533 produced a very pleasant image with just a single exposure, given that it could include the entire sun in one go. The 429 and 174 were similar. It's incredible to me that my main imaging camera for solar disks, the 174, came last in this test. Not through any fault of the camera, as we'll see, but just because it turns out the 174 is a poor match for an f7 optical train. The 533, as I said, gives excellent results in a single step. The 290 can give better results after 5 or 6 images taken and put together in a panorama. At f12.25, with the 1.75 Barlow, theory says my best camera should be the IMX 290. What did I find? Well, it ranked number 1, with a 533 a close second. the 429 third, and the 174 definitely grainiest and last. At f17.5, the 2.5x Barlow, theory says the best camera should be the IMX 533. Well, what happened? The 533 had an edge, the 429 and 174 were a tie, and the 290 came last. At f28 with the 4x PowerMate, theory says the best camera should be the IMX 174. The 174 was the clear winner in line with theory. 429 came second, 533 third, and the 290 clearly worst in line with theory. It should be noted that it's unusual to get steady enough seeing to use the 4x PowerMate, but when you do, the results can be spectacular. The combination of an f7 refractor, 4x PowerMate, and 174 camera won me an astronomy picture of the day, or an APOD. How about the white light analysis? This should be similar, although theory predicts slight differences due to the 540 nanometer wavelength of white light versus the 656 nanometer of hydrogen alpha. On the full solar disk at f7, the 533 gives excellent results in one step. The 290 can give better results after you take 5 or 6 pictures and put them together in a mosaic, and the 429 and 174 trail. At f7 with the 1.75x Barlow in white light, 533 was best, the 290 followed, 429 was third, and the 174 was last. At f7 with the 2.5x Barlow for white light, the 533 was best, the 429 came second, 174 third, and the 290 was last. And finally, with white light, f7 with a 4x Barlow at f28, the 174 was clearly the best in line with theory. The 429, 533, and 290 were similar. For a solar camera analysis, we should consider the following. You can't change the pixel size of your camera except to increase it via binning. You can't change the fundamental aperture of your telescope. What you do have control over is the focal ratio and focal length via a selection of different Barlow lenses. This essentially means you should use a small pixel size for a small focal ratio and a larger pixel size for longer focal ratio. That's why the quark users, who are typically at f30, get good results with a 174. But despite its popularity with solar imagers, it's really not the optimal camera for those of us with f7 refractors, unless you have excellent seeing and are pushing a 4x magnification. Well, what does this suggest in practice for my LUNT 100MT, which has a native f7.1 and hydrogen alpha? The best camera for the sharpest image should be the 678M, which has a 2-pixel image size. You can refer back to the table earlier in this video. But I don't own a camera like that, and I can't test it. I have seen some reports online of banding issues in the forums, so you might want to check into that, but I can't substantiate that. My IMX 290 camera with a 2.9 micron pixel size should produce the sharpest images of all the cameras at my native f7, although it's optimal with a 1.4x Barlow, and that's what I saw in my results. My IMX 533 camera with the 3.76 pixel size should get best results with the 2.5x Barlow, and that's what the results showed. My IMX 429 camera with a 4.5 micron pixel size should get best results with a 3x Barlow, which I don't own. My 174 camera is really optimal with my 4x Barlow at f28, and that's what I saw. But what other considerations should you have when solar imaging? The most important consideration has nothing to do with your equipment. Good seeing is vital to obtaining good images. Turbulence in the atmosphere will produce poor photos on even the most expensive equipment. I use the AstroSpheric app to predict when the seeing will be good or excellent in my area and try to restrict my imaging to those moments. Good seeing often happens early in the morning just after dawn, before the sun has heated up the landscape and hot air currents rise. So contrary to planetary imaging, when you want to observe when the planet is at the zenith, the best time for solar imaging is often just after sunrise, before the sun reaches 25 degrees above the horizon. Well, what criteria should be considered when buying a solar camera? I'll divide this up into vital and nice to have. Vital, first criteria, it should be mono, not color. The sun at hydrogen alpha is a single wavelength. You'll get a much better photo and higher sensitivity with a mono camera. You can add color back in post-processing, as I usually do if you wish. Number 2, the pixel size must match the focal ratio. I spent a great deal of time showing that in this video. It's really important, as my tests indicate. For years, I used my mismatched ZWO ASI 174 camera for full disk images at f7, unaware that it was the completely wrong camera for the full disk at f7. Next, FPS, frames per second. It is vital to freeze the seeing by setting your exposure to no more than 10 milliseconds. After that, you want as many images as possible in a short period of time, so your post-processing software can extract the best ones. A faster frame rate is your friend here. Practically speaking, anything over 60 frames per second is fine, but more is better. The exception to this rule is when imaging the full solar disk. My 533 camera, when set to 2000 by 2000 pixels, comfortably covers the entire sun with lots of room for framing prominences. But at that size, my frame rate is only 29 frames per second. Yet this combination produces some of my best ever full solar disk images because other characteristics of the camera compensate and it's a wider field image. The last vital criteria is cost, and that of course all depends on you. My advice is always to get the best camera you can afford, but cost is a factor for everyone. What about helpful factors? Full well capacity is pretty important. This refers to the maximum charge a pixel can hold before saturation. Better full well capacity means higher dynamic range. You could argue this belongs in the vital category, as it does significantly impact image quality and contrast. Number 2, a square aspect ratio. The sun is round. Why waste sensor area with a rectangle? Number 3, the full solar disk fitting comfortably without having to make a mosaic of multiple photos is nice to have. Who wants to have to take multiple images to get a full disk image? It's faster, easier, and less prone to error to just have a camera that can image the entire full disk in one go. Number 4, global versus rolling shutter. A lot of people swear this is vital, but my actual measurements and real-world experience don't support it being important. I have fantastic images using cameras with both types of shutters. Next, tilt support. Newton rings can be a problem with double-stacked solar imaging systems. By tilting the camera a degree or two with respect to the imaging plane, you can greatly mitigate this effect. Some third-party tilters are easy to use, others are a pain in the butt. Player One cameras have a built-in tilt mechanism, which is nice. Next, offset support. Offset refers to the minimum brightness assigned to every pixel. A small offset in solar imaging can improve the look of sunspots and other contrasty features. What about other general tips for solar imaging? For white light imaging, I like to use a Baader 540 nanometer continuum filter. This makes a remarkable difference in white light imaging. My APOD was taken using this filter. For white light imaging with a refractor, a quality Herschel wedge will generally produce a higher quality image with more contrast than a broadband filter placed over your objective. Both Roland Christian, the founder of astrophysics, and Yuri Petronin, the founder of Tech Telescopes, are on record saying their telescopes perform best with broadband solar imaging using a Herschel wedge versus any filter that goes over the objective. I can recommend the Herschel wedges made by Lunt and Baader. Number 3, if you have a Lunt or other Etalon-based hydrogen alpha telescope designed with a blocking filter, you do not need a UV IR cut filter for hydrogen alpha. All it does is create another source of internal reflection in your optical train. I understand, however, they are helpful for quark solar imaging. Newton rings can be a problem caused by internal reflections between optical surfaces. It can be mitigated using a tilt mechanism on your camera. There are several standalone tilters that are user-friendly and others that are user-hostile, frankly. And there are some cameras that build in this capability. A tilter can be handy, especially with double-stacked systems. Taking flats when solar imaging significantly improves the brightness and uniformity of your image. I get great results with the Daystar flat cap, which fits over my objective. Final thoughts and recommendations. What would I recommend if you had an f7 100mm hydrogen alpha refractor and you could only buy one camera, or if money was no object? I'd first ask what kind of photos you want to take. Do you strongly prefer full disk images, or do you want to zoom in on prominences that take up a small fraction of the sun's surface? If you don't mind making a mosaic of 5 or 6 images to get a full solar disk, IMX290M is a well-matched camera for f7 and low magnifications like a 1.75x Barlow. If you think mosaics are a pain in the butt and you want to use a 2.5x power mate, you should consider the IMX533M. It's got 4 times the resolution and 50% more full well capacity than the IMX290. If money is no object, I'd get both as well as the IMX174M. You might also consider filling out your Barlow collection as I have, so you have focal lengths to optimize every situation. I hope this review has been helpful, and please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.